Lovely. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Welcome to, just partly for the benefit of those who are now watching this recording, welcome to Upper Room Upfront Roles training, thinking particularly about hosting and worship leading and preaching. There are other things that we could talk about in terms of roles of sort of service in the church community, but we're just going to focus on these three today. Shall I lead us in prayer, and then we'll begin in earnest. Thank you, Lord, for the privilege of gathering together as your people. Thank you for your promise that where even two or three are gathered together, you'll be there. And thank you that we have known what that means, and perhaps never more so than in the last year. Please bless us this evening and help us to come away from this time all more full of your vision for your people gathered together, and more equipped to serve one another well in those times. Amen. Great. So just to outline how this evening will proceed, Hannah and I are going to talk for a little bit about hosting and worship leading, and very briefly on preaching. And then we'll hand over to Becky for some training and some of her insights on how to help our gatherings together to be as accessible as they can be to people who don't speak very much English. And she's probably going to cover a few of those things, a few of those roles in that time, but it's just going to be generally English accessibility. John's with us, which is great. He'd like to share a couple of things. If this is still true, John, you're very welcome to share a few things about Hope Church and what Hope are doing, particularly around preaching at the moment. And then if there's anything else that needs sort of saying, we might sort of wrap up some things there, and then give a bit of time for questions and conversation around those things at the end. The first thing to say that probably that frames all of this training and all of the things that we're going to be talking about here is that Upper Room, like Antioch churches in general, works on the principle of low bar and high possibilities. So what we mean by that is we want to make Upper Room and other Antioch churches communities where lots and lots of people in the church community can and do serve one another, lead one another, and can feel involved in having roles of service and leadership in church gathered, as well as kind of the other operations of the church community. So low bar means that things do not have to be, quote, high quality, unquote, in order to be acceptable in church services in our times together. We know that people look at the outward appearance, God looks at the heart. That doesn't mean we do rubbish stuff, but it does mean that we're not aiming for just like the highest production value we possibly can. So low bar, high possibility, lots of room for mistakes, lots of room for things not to be slick, lots of room for creativity as well. Great.
Yeah. So we're aware that a lot of you guys have, have been doing this for a while. Some of you just starting. So we're not going to try and cover everything that's involved in all of these roles. We're just going to kind of focus on a few key things that just to kind of remind us of actually what are some of the really important things, and maybe some of the things that we want to kind of grow in and move in these aspects. We are
particularly actually as we as restrictions ease and we're able to do things like singing together and discussion groups and things, just partly this is a little flag for saying, just remember that the way that we've been doing things in the last year does not have to be the way that we do things going forwards. So there are some things to keep, and there are some things to lose, and there are some things to kind of take and feed into how we go forward together as a church community.
Yeah. We are also currently working on a document that will have just kind of quite a lot of the practicalities of what's involved in each of the different roles and some things to bear in mind, and also with the kind of updated, this is what we can and can't do with COVID restrictions at the moment. So we will kind of send that out. So that'll be a very helpful reference document as well.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Shall I talk about hosting for a bit?
Yeah.
So hosting then, the first thing to say about hosting is that it is we both really deeply feel that this is like, it is a visionary role. Like hosting a church service is it's not primarily about, you know, making sure that you do smooth transitions between different things, or that you have a good interactivity. Like, actually, fundamentally, hosting a church service is about helping to remind the people of God who we are, and particularly in terms of gathering us together in the presence of God to worship Him and to encourage each other, and then scattering us out into the week, into the places that we go every day, and the workplaces, the families, the homes, all of that sort of thing. So gathering us together as the people of God and sending us out as the people of God. That gathering and scattering is, like, for us, that's our kind of vision for what hosting and sort of service leading actually is about, that gathering and scattering. So to break that down a little bit into more, I suppose, practical things, pre-service, it's mostly a comms sort of role. So it's, wherever possible, being in touch with the worship leader and the preacher of the service for that week. And there's no particular structured format for how you do that communication. It's just be in touch with them, ask them what they're thinking, what they're planning. And secondly, so comms with worship leader and preacher. Secondly, the comms thing with upper room on the WhatsApp group, post a reminder of the service, and posting the Zoom details is really helpful as well. We don't at the moment usually get people who kind of join irregularly on Zoom. They're usually there pretty consistently, but it's a good kind of marker and a kindness probably to the people who are joining us regularly on Zoom to be able to do that. So comms with the preacher and worship leader, comms with upper room, WhatsApp group. And then pre-service, the third thing is we want to get better at having a more kind of prayerful time just before services. So if hosts could arrive at about 1:45, 1:50 to be able to pray with preachers and worship leaders, that would be fantastic. We have done that intermittently, but we want to kind of get better at that. So pre-service comms, preacher and worship leader, upper room WhatsApp, and prayer beforehand.
Yeah.
Shall I just keep rumbling on, or do you want to go?
You just keep
I'll just keep rambling
on.
And yeah. I say rumbling, not rambling, quite deliberately, though it may turn from one to the other at some point. Please do, shout me down if it does. So in service then, just to talk through some of the things that we like service leaders to be doing. That the first and one of the only essential things really is welcome and gathering prayer. So this is that gathering moment that just signals a beginning to our time of kind of gathered worship, and is part of that reminding us who we are. So gathering us together, giving us an opportunity to point the eyes of our hearts in the same direction together towards the Lord, and gather as His people in His presence. Then an optional but good thing, some sort of intro activity, some sort of game, some sort of question, some sort of interactivity that is also part of that welcoming time, and perhaps optionally, perhaps might introduce something to do with the service theme or what the speaker is going to be talking about later, is not a teaching slot. Actually, it's almost the opposite of that. It's really not a teaching slot. And what Hannah and I have been thinking about with these recently is we just want them to be fun. We want to use that intro activity slot really to make Trinity feel like kind of place you want to be. So it's about, it's still part of that welcome. It's still part of that gathering. So fun, warm, together. But there are all sorts of options for that. So it could be games, could be little quizzes, could be introductory questions to get people thinking. When we can do discussions are great. People use whiteboards quite often for this, and that seems to work well, especially when people take things off on a slight tangent and draw pictures, but I realize that's just really usually me. So I'm just saying I enjoy how I engage with those things and disrupt, but maybe that's actually not helpful. I don't know.
John has a point.
John has a point. Great.
Yeah, I totally agree. Just it's also a great time for testimony.
Yes.
So yeah, just people saying what the Lord's been doing and answer prayer and stuff like that.
Yes. Which we have done a little bit more in the last few weeks, and that has been good. Yeah,
it's definitely something that we want to include more. Testimony is fantastic. Yep. Yeah. Then through the service transitions into time of usually sung worship, preaching into response. So the host, it's the host's ball to coordinate some sort of response time and prayer to the talk. It doesn't have to be the host who does that. It could be the preacher who leads that. It could be the worship leader who leads that. It's fine, but it's by default the host's ball to communicate about that and to kind of coordinate that in some way. Then after community time, so any news, any notices, and sending prayer. Those are kind of really the other essential things: the welcome and gathering prayer, the community time, and the sending prayer. Those are the only things that really it has to be the host doing, or should be the host doing. So that's kind of the in-service roles of the host, I suppose. John, go for it.
Yeah, just keep an eye out for the once a month communion as well.
Yeah,
true.
That affect your timings.
Good point. Thanks, John. Yes.
So I think that is generally written on the rota, so you should be able to see that. But it's the first Sunday of each month we are having communion.
Yep.
Well, John is coming to lead us in communion.
Yeah, which is brilliant.
Yeah.
Can I also clarify on the communion thing? Just because we haven't really made it clear before, / I've made it up. Would it be the host role to ensure that there's someone to distribute communion? Or if not, whose role is that?
I think it would default to the host on those weeks to ensure there's someone to distribute communion.
Great.
It's one of those things where if it can just
if it doesn't happen, we can make it up.
Yeah, it defaults.
It's just good for someone, so because sometimes that'd be great. Thanks.
No, that's a good point. Yeah.
Hi, Dave.
Just wondering, whose responsibility would it be to buy communion, to get like the bread and the?
It's also so it's either between me or the Palmers.
So your audio cut out for a second for us, which is probably why we're looking so confused.
We lost your audio, Emily.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right.
I was saying it's usually me, and then you looked shocked, and so I was saying, sometimes it's you guys actually as well. So far that has been me in a fixer role. Sort of in a fixed role. If we want to shift that to the host, then that is fine. I don't really mind doing it. I don't really mind. I've got the kind of the trays and stuff as well.
Yeah, I think if you're happy to keep that, Emily, that would be great.
That's fine. Cool. Thanks.
Just to avoid overcomplicating the host's role.
Yeah.
As far as possible. Great, thank you. So so just to come back from those practicalities then to our I suppose the where we're wanting to go with this. We have a couple of kind of goals that or hopes for
Directions we want to head.
yeah, directions of travel, I guess. And the first of those is to do with this gathering and scattering thing. We are very much, Hannah and I are very much passionate about whole life discipleship in the whole of life. So it's not, it's not just about the Sundays, it's not just about the Wednesdays, it's about wherever you go, whoever you come into contact with, the work you do, the places we go every day, all of that. And I think we both feel the host has a really key role in that, in kind of gathering people in from the week and sending people back out into their everyday, into our everyday situations and contexts. So there are, I think that the gathering and the sending prayers are a kind of little shift that we want to make really consistent, and we are hoping that will have a bearing on how we as a church community perceive our relationship to the big world outside Trinity and our life outside the church gathered. So whole life discipleship, gathering and scattering, we want to head in that direction of travel. And the second is within our gatherings, we want to create more time and space for openness to the Holy Spirit. I think it's been far too easy in this last year to just kind of get into a pattern of church community or church gathered means this happens, this happens, this happens, this happens, this happens, then we go. It's too easy to get mechanistic. It's too easy to get stuck in a rut, basically. So I think the hosts, actually, each of these different roles, and each of us as members of the body have a crucial role in our openness to the Holy Spirit, because that comes through each of us in different ways. But the hosts have a great opportunity to encourage that in the way that we lead those services. So whole of life discipleship, openness to the Spirit. I think we would also add testimonies into that as well, as ways in which we would like both of those things to be to see both those things. That could be a really practical thing that we could do. Great. Hopefully trod the line between rumbling on and rambling on just about, but that's about all on hosting for the time being. Thanks for the questions though, those are really helpful.
Yeah. Should I do the worship?
Yeah, go
worship
for it.
leading.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess if our vision for kind of hosting is gathering and scattering and kind of leading people through that, our vision for worship leading is fill this house with glory.
Thanks to John for that one. We like that.
Yeah. I guess firstly we just really want to encourage you all, because actually I think this has been really great over the last few months, and we really loved seeing lots of different people get involved in that, and just being much more creative in the ways in which we can worship. It's been good, actually kind of living out that we don't all just have to stand around and sing together, that we can worship in like many more ways than that. So so we actually kind of had less to talk about with worship leading, because actually we think it's already great. It's really good, and just an encouragement that actually, even as things do start to relax a little bit in terms of what we can and can't do, and as we start to be able to sing together, let's actually keep the creativity going. Like we don't have to have a musician up at the front leading everybody in sung worship as the only option. We have proved that there are other options that still work really well, and are still really honouring to God. So let's keep going with that. There's a couple of other, I guess, just kind of things that we just wanted to highlight of changes that might happen soon. At some point we're going to be able to sing together again, which is going to be lovely. when we get to that point, Dom and I are gonna reinstigate, is that the right word?
Revisit, could work.
Revisit.
Reinstigate is good too.
Reinstigate the upper room song list. So before COVID, we did have a list of, I don't know, about 20 or 30 songs that were our kind of core group of songs that we would base most of our songs off, such that if anyone is coming in new, or especially for people who don't speak English as a first language, actually then there's a core group of songs that they can get to know, so that they feel like they can get involved with that more easily. We've not really needed that during COVID because we haven't been able to sing together, so there's been a lot more flexibility in that. But when we get to the point of being able to sing together again, we will bring that back. We're going to get in touch with people and get people's suggestions as well, to kind of feed into putting that together. And I guess we've got sort of 3 main guiding principles for how we will pick the songs for that list, which also is worth bearing in mind. Again, guiding principles, not an absolute rule, so not everything in the song list will follow these, but things with simple lyrics. That doesn't necessarily mean the whole song needs to be simple, but often if the chorus is quite simple, it's really easy for people to get hold of that and to learn that. So generally avoiding really wordy songs, and trying to have some that have got nice simple lyrics. We're also keen on songs that are corporate, so that focus on we, us, our, rather than I, me, just to kind of reiterate the fact that actually we are a church body. We're not just a bunch of individual people in a room. So sometimes we've actually just taken songs and we've changed it from I to we, up to us. Sometimes it works, sometimes it really doesn't work. Don't feel like you have to do it all the time. It does get awkward sometimes if you try.
And if you do that, like, just make sure you've kind of practiced it before, or like you've thought it through before, rather than just going, we're just going to change this, and suddenly it's all sorts of things start not rhyming. It's like, just, to see and then to us, and no, it doesn't work. So but that's an option.
And there are a few that you have to be careful of, so like changing my soul to our souls. Occasionally, if you're singing it, it can sound a bit
you just have to pronounce it really carefully. That's all we're saying. Third one then.
And the third one, songs that declare truth. So songs that you can sing in any situation. So whether you're feeling fantastic and really close to God, or whether you're feeling really distant and in a really tricky place, actually, if we're singing songs that just declare truth, that's going to be great for whatever situation people are in. There is a time and a place for songs that are more, kind of subjective response, that, talking about how you're feeling, or, but we don't want to focus on those. We want to focus on the songs that are just declaring truth.
But those kind of leanings will be reflected as in some ways in the song list that we'll put out there.
But just to kind of explain that a little bit. And the final thing we wanted to say on worship leading was, like, let's enjoy it. Actually, it is a really good missional and evangelistic opportunity. It's an incredible thing to have a place where people are worshiping God, where you can sense God's presence, and like people are attracted to that. People will walk in, they notice that. And like, what better thing to have than for us to create a space where people can walk in and go, here's God. So yeah, let's really enjoy it, and press into that.
And I think I'd also just add to that, like, I say we, and probably us as a church community, we feel like hungry to sing together again, because we've really missed that we're looking forward to being able to do that regularly, and we're excited for it. I think also there are probably going to be a lot of people who are like hungry for shared experience, and hungry for the kind of closeness with people, and whether they know it or not, the closeness with God that comes from the shared experience of song together. So just to build on what Hannah said, actually, I think we can have a confidence and enjoyment in our invitation, and also in our worship together, that this is a beautiful thing. John.
So I'm just gonna. I know I've told you guys this story, but just to kind of back up what you're saying, I remember in the middle of January, Adhana walked into the church for the first time. Just walked in off the street. There were about 6 people. It was freezing cold. Half of the congregation had COVID. I mean, it was like just a total dire mess in many ways. And Hanneke had got this. She got a worship CD out, and I don't know. I think she said, "Put your hands in the air and worship God." And people were doing it, even though they couldn't sing. And I just remember like standing next to Adhana and her looking around, saying, "Hey, I'll be back. I'll be back." And I think that just that decision to worship in right through the kind of darkest times is something that was really beautiful about the church. And so I guess where I'm going with that is, I mean, you know this already, but you're all worship leaders. We're all worship leaders, wherever we're standing in the room, whether we're up front or whether we're, ringed round, trying to find a space under a heater. We're all worship leaders, and like you guys are doing an amazing job that way. And I just say, just keep doing what you're doing. I think it's really powerful.
Thanks, John.
Thanks. Awesome.
Do you want to do
preaching really briefly? So four principles of preaching that John's spoken to some of us about before, and just that we try to reiterate sometimes: clear, biblical, visual, and applied. So clear is something that Becky's going to talk to us quite a bit more about, with accessibility for people for English. Biblical, teaching the Bible, being seen to teach the Bible. Visual, I'd be interested to see, actually, because sometimes we think visual and we think, I'll just put a nice picture up there. Who can anybody, if I do this, can you all see this palm cross? If I do this, what's the sentence? Can anybody remember? This could really backfire, actually.
Stephen looked like he was mouthing something.
You actually not got it. Oh, that's gutting.
Stephen was desperately trying to remember what they were.
Servant.
The servant who
is
wins
the king
victory.
who wins victory by the
Who's
cross?
sacrifice?
Sacrifice, yes.
The king. No, the king.
Got it.
The king who wins victory by sacrifice.
There we go.
There
We
you
got
go.
it. Okay, so that's one illustration of what visual can look like. Because we're not just trying to put up nice pictures, we're trying to explain our contents visually, so that if people don't have the vocabulary or the retention or the English abilities to kind of follow exactly where we're going with our points, actually there is a thread of visuals that can still be grasped. So props, or those the icons that we sometimes use to put next to key points that come up.
Stephen's very good at that.
Stephen's really good at that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So clear,
James.
biblical, visual applies.
is also
Yeah,
really good at that.
absolutely. We have recently enjoyed, with the Sermon on the Mount in the last few weeks, having key ideas that are repeated week by week. So again, this isn't meant to be a test. You can take the teacher out of the classroom, can't you? But can you take the classroom out of the teacher? What are the 3 things that Hannah was telling us about the Sermon on the Mount the very first time?
It's a whole sermon.
Yeah, it's a whole sermon.
Mark.
I'm going to keep going. It's prescriptive
Jesus.
and descriptive.
Yeah, prescriptive and descriptive.
Jesus is well clever.
Jesus is smart. Yeah, so those three things have come up in some form or another every week since we started this preaching series, and it's been really helpful. Like I said, we were having a conversation with Johnny a couple of weeks ago, and she was just saying like, wow, the Sermon on the Mount's really changed my life at the moment. I'd never really thought of it. I'd never really thought that there were some things where Jesus is giving commands and some things where he's giving, examples and stories, and it's like prescriptive and descriptive, and that just is changing the way I'm seeing it. And it's really, I'm just waking up with it on my mind, thinking about how I'm going to live like that today. Wow, that's great. And that's because that had come up several times. So it actually, the repetition of key ideas, themes, visuals, again, helps to get things embedded well into our heads and our hearts. So that's been really cool. We've liked that, those few key ideas that have come back again and again, week by week. So we'll be thinking in the future about how we do that with other teaching series. And just to project forward again, looking ahead, we look forward to the time when we can involve discussion groups in our teaching again. We've had a lot of monologue. Monologue is not intrinsically bad, but monologue plus discussion groups is usually much better. So we're looking forward to when we can have discussion again, and also how discussion and groups can link to application and to response and prayer. So that's a kind of just, as we go forward, let's remember that in our preaching planning and preparation. I think that's all we had on preaching for the time being. I wanted to hand over to Becky and then to John to tell us more about those things, and Becky to probably fill in lots of good things about English accessibility in general. Over to you.
Great. To start with, I'm going to give a bit of context. So if you don't know, I teach English for the council, but something else I do with that is, it's called Manchester ESOL Advice Service, but we basically now have one centralised waiting list in Manchester. So everyone who's applying for an English lesson in Manchester comes through us. And in that, we're on number nearly 5,000 for this academic year alone. So that's not new students. No, that's not all students. That's only new students who've applied. So there are thousands more on top of that who have been in classes and are continuing in classes. Within that service, of those 5,000, M8 is the largest postcode represented, M8 being Cheetham and Crumpsall. So like we have people learning English all around us, like the highest place in Manchester really. And then within that we have 5 levels. If you're interested, pre-entry, entry 1, entry 2, entry 3, level 1. But within those 5 levels, probably about half of the people we assess are the bottom 2. And the bottom 2, we're talking like beginner. A good second level, you could have a short conversation with them. So even within those thousands of people learning English, the majority learning English still are lower. You will have some who are learning English and not in classes, but we're not even talking like necessarily high English. So for context, if you knew Sia when he was in church, if you spoke to Azada when she came, or either of the Fatima and Afsana when they came at Christmas, all of them were level 1, which is our highest level. So yeah, the rest are still under that. I would say Sam at the moment is probably about the middle of those 5 levels. So basically the reason we're doing this, or I'm sharing now, is because if we're inviting people in, I'd expect most of them almost to be learning English, or a lot of them to be learning English. So it's not just about who we currently have, but also if someone comes in off the street, how much are they going to understand of what's going on? So I'm going to make you do more work in a minute. But before I do, anyone who's studied English in like a formal classroom, so not like necessarily in country, but like in school or college or something, how would you do listening activities in a classroom? Can anyone remember?
Studying English.
Oh, not English, sorry, another language. I teach English. You guys don't learn English.
Observation first.
Pardon, Helen?
Observation first, like looking at things.
Yeah, you'll talk about the context or pictures.
But yeah, just a lot of listening.
Yeah, anyone go. I'm not just speak.
You'd have like a tape of a conversation and you'd have comprehension questions.
Yeah, how many times would you listen to it?
Twice.
At least twice. That's what we do.
I can't
John?
remember that.
You relatively short snippets of speech
At a time, yeah. So what I was taught was you should, like if you were doing it in a classroom with an English learner, you'd play something 3 times. And like John said, it would be short and you would introduce what it is first. Now, obviously, we're not doing that. We're talking for like 20 minutes. We're saying things usually once. But just in that, you can see how it would be challenging for someone who's learning English to listen to a sermon. So what we need to do, well, what I think is the most helpful thing to do, is to put as many clues on the slides as to what you're talking about. So the reason we would get people to observe first, or the reason you listen multiple times, is because the first time and while you're introducing it, someone's kind of orientating themselves. So we're talking about cooking. Right, I can start kind of thinking about the words I already know about cooking. Or if they don't understand a word or a phrase, you can kind of start guessing what it means more because you know the kind of bigger picture. If you're going in completely blind, you're actually going to pick up a lot less just because you don't know what to relate it to. So you could do this, you could help people with the pictures on the slides, it could be short sentences on the slides, it can even just be a verbal introduction where you say, now I'm going to talk about this. But anything you can kind of put up before you launch into something is helping someone with lower English to kind of guess at what you're saying more, or to place what you're saying more. And I think like whenever you're changing your key point, you should try to give someone that. So like a slide change basically, or something else appearing, whether that's in service leading or in preaching, like something that says, okay, now I've changed and I'm talking about this, before you go on and do it. Because then rather than kind of lagging behind you, you're letting them kind of get ahead. So with that basis, what's the shortcut? No. Okay. I've got some phrases which I just took out the Sermon of the Mount. And I'd like you to have a guess. There's no right or wrong answer, but which of these and why do you think could cause problems for someone who's learning English? I'll pick on you in a minute, so have time to think, and then.
I mean, hypocrite.
Yeah, hypocrite, that's going to be a hard word. Emily?
And synagogue, while we're on the subject. I was going to say sorry, I jumped to the bottom. Like you wouldn't necessarily in the person's first language use that verb in that way. So for a day to have something is like that, it might not be expressed in that way in another language, for example.
You've got you've got a very complex series of ideas in the first one. So when, do not, as they do, where they do it, why they do it. Those are all the things and it's all in a single sentence, which is tricky.
If I was reading that in Urdu, I would only understand the third sentence. The "do not worry" sentence would be the only one that I would be able to understand.
So I remember this guy used to work for us in Mauritania. There were two guys. One of them, he wasn't educated in French, and so what he did was, unlike the other guys who were, he just wrote in very short sentences. And when it was audited, this French guy came in and looked at some of our reports, and he said of the Arab speaker, he said, I understand what he's saying. I wouldn't say it that way, but I understand it. Whereas the other guys, they write these long sentences, and I simply don't understand what they're saying. Their sentences just crash. I mean, obviously that's about writing, but just the length of the sentence.
Any other thoughts? These are all good thoughts so far.
There's metaphor in the second one, and that can be tricky.
And we're like in English, we're well, not just in English, but with a like English having come out of the Bible, basically, like those kind of metaphors make sense to us, and they might not necessarily make sense to someone of a completely different language and where that language has come from.
Yeah.
So I mean, isn't the point that actually it's designed to surprise? It's designed, the words aren't the ones that you expect, and that's exactly what's problematic for a foreign speaker, is they need the cues. They want to work out a menu of possibilities for what the next thing is, and these aren't on it.
Good. So I picked. Oh, go on, Helen or Dave or whoever speaks.
Nobody says the word shall. Speaking. So yeah.
Yeah, we even don't teach the word shall anymore because we're like, no one speaks it. Why would you teach it? That's general advice. Or at least not until a very high level. So I did pick all these out because there were like things in them I saw. Firstly, these are taken from the NIV, which is a reason we use the NIRV, because it kind of does some work for you. Yeah, like John said, the first one is long, and there's a lot of, it's all linked together. So if you miss one of the links, you miss like the rest of the sentence. So generally, the shorter the sentences, the better. The second one, these aren't exclusive, these are just some common things. Yeah, it's unexpected, it's a metaphor, and you wouldn't think of like lamp and body going together, or light and healthy. And I think it's much more common that an English learner would think I've got it wrong than actually understand the metaphor. So basically any help you can give to understand metaphors, good. Yeah, shall is just a bit odd. And the last one, I picked because of words like each and enough. Like if you didn't understand one of them, you might not understand the sentence, because they're quite important to understand it. So when you're thinking about what's good for an English learner, it's not just the vocabulary, basically simple vocabulary and simple sentences together. And so on that, I'm not saying that everything you say has to be in a simple short sentence, because that's a lot of work or it's just not achievable. And sometimes we want to say things that are harder to say in that way. So what I would recommend is that you make sure like your key points you've put into simple English. so that people have as good a chance as possible of understanding your key points. If you want to then give an explanation or an illustration that is a bit more complex, it's okay if someone doesn't understand one illustration, or it's okay if they get a bit lost in the explanation, as long as when you then move on to the next key point, like you've signaled that, you're giving them clues to help them get back on track. And so at the end of the talk, even if they didn't understand anything else, if they understood your key points, that's still a win, if that makes sense. So key points in simple English, and then like signaling each time you're changing key points and giving clues about what it's about. That would be my main advice on the English front. I've put it here. Repetition is great, like repeating your key points to give people as much chance to do it. I also put fewer words on the slides. Like, it's actually distracting to try and listen and try and read. Shorter sentences are good. So yeah, have your key points there and then expand on them in what you say. It also helps you to translate more easily if you have fewer words, which is a plus. What have I put next? Oh yeah, on translation. Hopefully, if we're doing everything we just said, we don't need to translate, but translating is helpful for people with a lot of weaker English. It also just signals that we are not one church who will speak the same language and who are all the same. So even if someone comes in and their language isn't up, it's kind of encouraging and says something about who we are. At the moment, we're using Farsi and French, and these are the versions we're using, especially for the Bible. Use these ones because otherwise it's like putting the King James version up, I've been told, which is potentially less helpful. This might change as time goes on, but that's the current guideline, I think.
Becky, could you just explain why we've got those languages at the moment? That might helpfully tie in. Yeah,
so French is for Sam. Farsi was because of Hadir, who was coming or came. He hasn't been back, but he's making noises that he might. And there's another Farsi speaker I know who I want to get along. So it's just widely spoken, and especially among people who come to church, so it doesn't seem too harmful as a language to have up.
We've also been thinking about just at the moment in general, trying to have, where possible, key points in for translation in 3 languages: English, and then whichever 2 languages are spoken by the people in our church community with the least good English, basically. So it might be that actually those languages change if let's say Sam just has some fantastic English lessons with a marvelous English teacher and his English improves really, really quickly. And then somebody who comes along has just come from Romania and doesn't speak a word. We would probably change French to Romanian. So I guess we're looking for trying to accommodate and make church as accessible as possible for the people who might have the biggest barriers.
John, did you want to say something?
No, you've already put it there, actually. I mean, I'll talk in a moment about another strategy for achieving the same thing, which I'm not sure about. It's just I looked up the NMV on something. It's the New Millennium version, actually, but I look it up on I type it in as YouVersion Farsi NMV, but YouVersion and Bible.com are the same thing. So no, Becky is the short answer. Not really.
Great.
The translation of the headings and things. So using Bible for your headings is good because you can always find out where it is. You should use the verses to track it. But otherwise, if you've got like a word or a sentence that you want to put in, using Google Translate works really well. particularly for French. It's less good for Farsi, just because they're less similar languages.
Didn't the kebab descend like a dove once?
I was writing a sermon about the Holy Spirit coming on Jesus, and the kebab came down from heaven like a dove.
No, it came down. Yeah.
Anyway, yes. So the summary there is using Google Translate for the headings, and translating from English into the language, so into Farsi, and then in a separate tab, putting the Farsi language into the translator back into English and seeing whether it comes back as the same thing. If it comes back as the same thing, you've got a reasonably good chance that it's the final check. Once you've done that, particularly with French, is to ping it to somebody in the congregation who speaks French, and see whether they're happy with it. But yeah, so translate with Google Translate and then back translate it to check that it's got what you want.
Great.
Can I?
Yeah.
Sorry, can I quickly ask? I don't know whether this is the case with Farsi, but obviously some languages are read right to
Farsi
left,
is
not
like
left to
with
right.
an Arabic, what would be known as an Arabic. Yes.
Okay, so it would be good to reflect that where possible. I think I don't know whether, I feel like it's sometimes happening, sometimes not happening, and because I wasn't sure whether Farsi was one of those languages, I didn't check. I wasn't sure, but just to, because otherwise it's like, oh, you're right in my language, like not right.
Yeah. So PowerPoint and Google Translate both have settings that you can pick for right to left languages.
Does it automatically, doesn't
it?
Yeah, sorry, I don't mean that like we're writing it backwards. I just mean like if you're like aligning it, if it's all aligned the wrong way, then as in to the left rather than the right. Does that make sense?
So I think what Emily's saying is, so say for example your Farsi, although it read fine, it set a new line over on the left rather than on the right of the page.
Yeah.
And that's because it was reading in the right direction. But if you look on, say, Google Slides or Google Docs, there's a master key that actually puts the direction of the paragraph as well as the actual text itself. And that causes the lines to restart back on the right-hand side of the page. So on this, the lines would restart on the left. So it both reads left to right, but it also starts the lines back over on the left. What Emily's saying is that sometimes the lines, even if the text is aligned right to left, the new lines are appearing on the left rather than the right. Is that right, Emily?
Yeah, so it's not unreadable. It's just like, that's not how you write my language.
Yeah.
And if that sounds complex, you can just write small enough bits of text that you don't need to go onto new lines.
But it's the aligning, isn't it? As in, if you just align it to the right-hand side, then job done.
Yeah.
Great. I'm sure.
Sorry, I probably overcomplicated that. But
yeah, I'm sure people can work it out.
If you do need a hand or want to chat with anybody about this, feel free to get in touch with me or Becky or, well, me. I'll volunteer myself rather than my wife. I'm really happy to chat through both the Bible translation and the slides translation, and to have like a proof check of them if people want to or anything like that.
Brilliant. I think that would be very helpful because I think some people are quite technical and some people aren't. So for the whole low bar that we're trying to achieve, I think for me, I look at it and go, oh my goodness, that's a lot. It seems that way anyway. But yeah, maybe we can have a chat at some point about that. That'd be helpful.
Also, it is totally acceptable to make your slides in English and to ask someone else to help you translate them. So it may just be, I mean, even if you don't have time, it might be that someone else can actually step in and do the translation and put that into your slides for you. So that is acceptable to ask for help on that.
So as a spoiler, there at Hope Church at the moment, we don't translate the slides. We do it another way.
which I don't like.
Yes, there are reasons not to do it.
Should we move on to this now? John, do you want to talk about Hope Church, and then maybe we can set the debate firing or something?
Yeah, so what we do in Hope Church is that I do this more than other people, is that I will write a script, which is much longer than the slide headings, in Google Translatable English. Google Translatable English focuses a lot on short sentences and not necessarily easy words. Google doesn't care how difficult. Google's quite happy with a word like unambiguous. It's fine with it, doesn't care. But it is much less happy with a word like ROW, which is like, well, you know, what do you mean? You know, it requires a huge amount of context to work out what that word means, or set, or something like that. So you write it in unambiguous English as a series of short sentences, as a script. It's normally about 1 page long. And then you just Google Translate it. Basically, you give it to people as a script for the slides. Now, the advantage of it is that it doesn't matter, you know, like if today you have somebody who speaks Amharic, and one person who speaks French, and one person who speaks Romanian, and one person who speaks Chinese, you just do a Chinese translation. The Chinese translation is really good because there is just a vast volume feeding into the machine learning of Google Translate. So it tends to be pretty accurate. And and if you end up throwing some of those in the bin at the end of the day, well, okay, you know, it was no extra effort really. And in some ways it can be easier than reworking the slides, because you just write a simple script and bang it into Google Translate. Now, there are reasons not to do it, including the fact that you end up almost targeting someone. You end up sort of giving them this thing and say, here, this is for you, which they might not appreciate. You do rely heavily on Google Translate to do that as well. And for some languages, it can be messy. Farsi. So for example, Farsi on Sunday, your Farsi had different words for love, including one for romantic love, rather than agape love that the Bible uses. And it's really impossible to root that out at the moment. So it is a kind of perilous enterprise in some ways. When I've tried to get feedback from people, like there was a Romanian family coming in, and I remember one time in a discussion, Janice said, they really understood that message. They just absolutely knew what was going on. The reason why they absolutely knew what was going on, because there was a nice simple sheet that told them what I was saying. So yes, I'm not saying it's a perfect system, but it's right now we're going that way in Hope Church because it's a way of trying to keep the slides less cluttered, and it is simpler. And particularly us as you, yeah, we'll have 1 or 2 people consistently coming from any one language group, but there isn't like a real block of people coming from a particular language group. So Becky, tell us why not to do it. I'm not wedded to this. I'm just saying it's like.
To me, it feels more exclusive than inclusive, because if you've got the slides that are going as you're going through, then what you're doing is, like we're talking about, you're kind of keeping people up to speed with where you're at. So it's like, okay, this is now what I'm talking about, and it's in your language so you can understand, but you can also try to follow me. Whereas I feel like if you're giving someone something in their language, you're just saying, right, sit in a corner and read this. And when I've finished speaking in English, you can join back in again. That's the vibe I have from it.
Yeah, it's designed to fire a whole series of, it's built around the slides. That's the thing. It's not a full script. It's built around the slides, and it's also designed to do things like give vocabulary clues. So you speak for much longer than, it's basically almost, if you imagine the information on a text slide, if you like quadruple it, and it fires in a lot of the vocabulary that they would need. So I remember sitting in a German church service, and they kept, I can speak a bit. And I remember the guy just kept using a word that I didn't know. I just turned to my brother-in-law and said, well, what's this word? And once you knew that word, then it was much easier to follow the rest of what he was saying. And so it does give like vocabulary clues that might work. I mean, you could try it with someone sympathetic. I mean, it might be worth actually doing it and asking Sam what he thinks. Did this help? Were you happy with it? And I'm not going to lie. I mean, I don't think everyone is. And I think different people react to it in different ways, but it might be actually worth road testing it.
It's interesting you say that, John. It makes me think sometimes of school, where if I'm aware that a certain student or several students needs a slightly different worksheet or a table that will help them to plan something and organize their thoughts, I know that there will be some students who will receive that and go, "Oh my goodness, that's amazing." And it's kind of cute, because you see this 11-year-old basically receive it as a kind of like, "Oh, yes," which is sometimes problematic in itself. And you sometimes see students like, I don't want this. Do you mean you don't trust me to organize my thoughts?
Exactly.
What are you talking about? It's exactly that dynamic.
Do you not find, Dom, that but if you give someone a piece of paper too early, they will stop listening to you and read their piece of paper.
100%.
Because that's what I think is the danger, is that someone's so busy reading what you've given them that they can't also follow what you're saying, because it's just like too mentally taxing to do both at once.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Becky, I do want to stress that this is about 300 or 400 words. It's by no means a full script. And basically people, if somebody's a good reader, they can read it in less than 2 minutes.
I like the idea of doing all these different things, but my major concern is that if somebody is doing a talk and they're translating it and they're doing slides with translations on it, and the slides take time and everything, you're going to get a lot less people actually being willing to do talks, because there's just so much work involved. I'm already stretched just to do a talk and do the slides and translate the slides, and then to do a script and everything else. I'm just a little bit concerned that people are going to be running out of time and saying, I can't do any talks, and it's all going to be down to 2 or 3 people.
So Henneke, I don't actually work on the slides. I don't put foreign languages on the slides now. I just use the translate, which is actually quicker. It's about 45 minutes, I reckon. So I'm definitely wouldn't say do both. Both is way too much. I'd say either or.
Palmer, do you have a steer on what we as Upper Room are going to run with for a bit? In some ways, I feel like it would be helpful at this stage for us just to, hey, we're going to try this one and run with it and give the people who are preaching a chance to get a feel for it. And with the aim to make things easier for English speakers in the church service.
Let's continue with putting translations on the slides for now. We've been doing that for the last few weeks. I think we should continue with that. I think hopefully that will also encourage us to keep our slides really simple. I think that was going to be one of mine, Dom's other comments as well. Really simple slides and big text. You actually, this is partly me saying like, really, I should wear glasses, but I don't normally wear my glasses. And if I'm sat at the back of the room, I struggle to read the slides if there's more than about 7 lines of text on it. And actually that is not much on a slide.
So we're really not talking about translating very much.
No.
Actually, the thing that I would be perfectly happy. I'd be perfectly happy if a preacher had their main points in 3 languages.
Yeah.
And then
the passage.
And then, well, yes and no, in the sense that people with phones can look up a Bible passage. So, do you have to translate the Bible passage? Arguably, it's nice to, for the sense of making people feel included. Do you have to if you're tight on time? No, I don't think you do.
But maybe just tying up people beforehand to make sure that they can get the passage.
But so if there's,
you don't have to translate the passage, you just have to Google it, copy and paste.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
So that, I think that's easy. Sorry, I don't do this at all, but I think that's easier than your words translation. But
so yeah, I mean, I think what we're talking about here is that we're wanting to have a baseline level of something that our least confident English speakers can access. And to take the Palm Cross example from earlier, for instance, I didn't do this. We weren't doing this at the time. If I were doing that talk again, I would translate the king who wins victory through sacrifice. Would I translate anything else? Depends probably how much time I had. I would translate the king who wins victory through sacrifice. I would come back to it again and again and again. I would direct people to the translations of the Bible, and I would say, here's the king who wins victory through sacrifice in these 3 languages. That's our point. It's Palm Sunday. Have a great day. It's not about trying to kind of make sure that you've got all sorts of things that are translated and all the nuances of each point in different languages. I think that's not really what we're going for.
Yeah.
If that's any help with that.
Also, the simpler your English is on your main point, the less the need to translate anyway, hopefully. Like, the more understandable you've made it, the more understandable it is.
And I mean, we talked a bit about cues as well. I mean, I think obviously there is a real power in story, is that people can often follow stories and sort of expected lines of communication as stories develop. And actually, for all the stuff that we do on text, ultimately people will want to listen to you and understand what you say verbally. And I think it can definitely be frustrating, because you want to speak with passion and drive. You want to change your tone, inflection, speed, and all of these kind of things. And it can be kind of frustrating when you're speaking slowly the whole time. You feel like you're wading through treacle, and sometimes it's, it's not as enjoyable as it could be. And the end game, I mean, like in TCC, one of the congregations is you couldn't crack a joke. You'd never get a laugh. I mean, it's like people just didn't, like 70% of the congregation just didn't get the punchline in time, and it was if you feed off people's, energy when you're speaking, it's like, great. But, it can be tough, but I just keep doing it and just think we're making disciples, and stick with it. But yeah.
Great. Thank you both very much. I think it's fair to say this is early stages of development and how we do these things. So totally hear and also very much feel the concerns over time and capacity and kind of workload around this, and we definitely don't want that to become an onerous burden. So please keep talking to us about how it's going, what's good, what's difficult, what's working, what's not, and we'll keep refining it. But thank you, really interesting to hear those thoughts, really helpful. We don't have very long left until 9, and we definitely don't want to keep past then. Has anybody got any questions at this point, or any thoughts they'd like to add, any comments they'd like to make, anything else?
I have a question about, do we have a service length time aim?
Good question. Good question.
Yes, an hour and a quarter is the kind of the aim. So aiming to finish at 3:15. Yes, but we're not going to come and like beat you up if you go over.
Drastic. I was thinking, like, I thought you were going to say, like, cut the mic. That's really that escalated really quickly.
I mean, at some point, like just before lockdown in Hope Church, we adopted something of Oldham's Church, which is the mid-service brew break, where you got like 5 minutes to kind of scatter, grab yourself a cup of tea, and like recenter a bit.
Nice.
So if you guys wanted to experiment with that, I am aware that actually concentration span,
it's a really interesting question,
is an issue. As someone who actually has a fairly short concentration span myself, I mean, it's like, but yeah, everyone on this call has an unusually long concentration span, and a lot of the people we're trying to reach don't.
Good. Interesting. Thanks for that.
Any other questions? Great. I mean, as always, you can definitely get in touch with us if you have any other questions. That's totally fine.
Yeah, 100%.
Just
sorry.
Emily first.
Just a quick one. So we used to, before COVID, use, sorry, this is somewhere between visuals and worship leading, but because it does touch on worship leading, I hope it's allowed.
Yeah.
We used to use OpenLP, and that was that. Yeah, woo. We have switched to using PowerPoint for many reasons, like everyone uses it. So when we were on lockdown, like everyone would be using it on Zoom, and that's fine. I would suggest we continue to use PowerPoint, but that in order to make that easier, we build a library of the slides, and it'll get even easier as you define the list, such that if you're leading worship, you can just go and grab off the Google Drive the slides with the lyrics that are already there, rather than having to like copy and paste from Google and do the tweaking and all the bits and bobs. Anyway, that's just if people strongly disagree and want to go back to OpenLP and want me to do it again, I can.
What's easiest for people who are on visuals?
I would say PowerPoint, especially when you're using Zoom, because then you've just got one thing, and you run from service leading to worship leading to talk, and it's all on PowerPoint. You don't have to switch between things. That's part of the reason why I would suggest that we keep going in that direction.
Yeah. Thanks. We'll be in touch about that.
Okay, cool.
My question was just building on Becky's earlier question about time. Do we have a hard start time? That sometimes,
yes,
between 2 and 2:10 kind of.
We would like to start at 2.
Okay.
We're aware that
in practice, we usually end when Hannah and I are leading, we start about 3 minutes past 2.
Cool. So start at 2, and the reality is we'll end up starting a couple of minutes past, but
Yeah.
I
be
think
up there ready to start at 2.
Yeah.
we don't want to wait until everybody is there before we start, because otherwise it will just slip and slip and slip.
Yeah.
So I think the temptation is sometimes to say, oh, there's not many people here, I'll just wait another few minutes. Fight that temptation.
There have definitely been times when I've got up to host a service and just felt a sort of sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, and known with a dread and terrible certainty that Upper Room Church won't exist next week. And then by 2:30 it's fine, and we're the people of God and we're gathered in Trinity, and it's lovely. So,
I know that feeling.
Sorry?
I know that feeling. Yeah. I had a great time when I stood outside once chatting with somebody, and they saying, oh, there are lots of people here, and you think, oh yeah, definitely, we're a great church. Took them inside and there were 3 people in the room, and I went, oh no.
Have you been missold, community? Call now. We're still recording. Great. Any more for any more?
Great.
Fantastic. I'll shut the recording off there.